And seeing as both landscape photography and human portraiture are both featured in this current exhibition, is there a difference in level of difficulty in a good capture of these two genres?
I'd say the difficulty is different. It's not a different level. There are different requirements for both, for each. And you can't apply what you applied to one to the other. It doesn't work that way.
Do you have a preference for shooting either human faces or landscape photography?
I like both. For landscape, it's pretty straightforward compared with portraiture, because with portraiture you also have to worry about the person's expression and capturing the moment, whereas with landscape you have a bit more time to play with it. I've done some very interesting portraits. Sir Y.K. Powell. I photographed Mr. Chow, who was the founder of Chow Tai Fook Jewelry Company in Guangzhou many years ago, and I photographed him for the first New World Development Annual Report. And I found both Mr. Chow and Sir Y.K. to be absolute gentlemen. And I think it helps to work with people like that, because you get a good result in the end, because there's some input from the person as well as what you're doing.
Yes. How amazing. And do you find that when taking portraits of, characters, be they prominent members of society or just the average person really living in Hong Kong, as a photographer, is it difficult to establish that sense of trust with a new subject?
Well, with Sir Y.K. Powell, that was for the Worldwide 20 book. And Henry Steiner, who was designing the book, prepped me before I went to take his photograph. And he said, there's a photograph in his office of him swimming in the Suez Canal, because most of his ships sail through the canal. And he said, try and get him to stand in front of the photograph and then ask him some questions about how he managed to get to swim in the canal and get his mind off what we were actually doing and on to thinking about swimming in the canal. And it worked like that. And it's probably one of the best portraits I've taken.
Amazing. And what are your current projects like?
Sorry?
What are your current projects like?
Well, I've only got one current project left. I went from studio photography into architectural and industrial. And in recent years, it's mainly been architectural photography for major international architects like Foster and Partners and Takeoff Free. So I started this project I'm working on now in 2014. I quoted on a 3-year project. There have been delays because of all the things that have happened, and I expect to complete this project a little bit after Easter this year. So it's gone on for quite a while.
So having been photographing since the 1970s, and now we're in the new millennium, how has your photography practice evolved since then? Be it in terms of technique or an actual tool that you can use, or just your interest in photographing different subjects?
Well, the technology has changed dramatically, for a start. When I first started in the 70s with studio photography, I was using 4x5 and 8x10 sheet film. And those are big pieces of film, and they're very different from roll film and from digital that we have today. I again used large format on architectural projects later on, and was able to apply what I learned in the studio to using them on architectural and industrial projects. But in Hong Kong's, especially in the summer in Hong Kong, where it's very hot and humid, if you're using for the 4x5, there would be some problems. You had to keep the film in an insulated container when you went out in summer because of the heat and humidity. When you put the film into the camera and remove the slide and expose the surface of the film to the heat and humidity, it could sometimes jump or move and produce a blurred image. So you had to get it from the insulated container into the camera and take the photograph very, very quickly to capture a sharp image in summer. It was a little easier in winter and the cooler months, but particularly difficult in summer.
Interesting. And given that cameras now are inbuilt into our handheld devices in every sort of a smartphone device, so a camera lens is literally just a fingertip away. Do you think that has brought down the level of photography as an art form?
Yes.
Yes.
I think people take a lot for granted now, whereas if you were using the type of camera I've just described, you had to have a lot of technical knowledge. You had to plan out how you were going to do these things. It wasn't simply point and press a button.
Is there a way of remedying this so that photography can be once again seen as something more precious?
Well, I have two sides to this in my mind. I agree with what you've just said and the question you asked. I'm very happy, being a former school teacher, that now photography is available to everyone.
Yes.
Because this is really the aim of teaching art in secondary schools, and I think this has been achieved. But on the other hand, as you've just raised, it tends to trivialize it at the same time. And I think this can be remedied by teaching in secondary school level, visual arts, I'll generalize, but if you're learning photography, then you can, as a school teacher, you can raise points for students to consider to make them more aware of the value of what they're doing, instead of just treating it as a throwaway item when you press a button, and if it doesn't work out, well, we'll just trash it and we'll do it again. There are ways of addressing this.
Very interesting. That's a very interesting comments, John. Thanks for that. And as part of this exhibition we have on at Asia Society, when we are recovering and reviewing these photographs taken by photographers from the past, it's essentially a memory exercise as well. We are, as viewers, delving into the memories of a life lived by someone we don't necessarily know. And what do you find most endearing about the photographs you might have seen today in this gallery?
I think they're very important because they are documenting history, and it's very easy to throw history away, or the record of history. And as we're living through an historical period right now where history is, it's being rewritten rather creatively, as you can see with what's happening in Ukraine, what happened when Donald Trump was president in the United States. And it makes you wonder, in periods like the Roman period, the Renaissance and so on, how much of what we read today is fact and how much is creative writing? And you have to be careful, I think, that you find people who will document the fact as opposed to creating a false reality. This is very important in history, I think, and it's overlooked very easily in today's media circles. Interesting.
And in this current exhibition, we have 4 chambers, of course, 2 of which are devoted to the photographic output of Lê Phúc Zi, who, as previously mentioned, was born in Singapore but spent the majority of his life in Hong Kong. And in a sense, his photography is really simply a diary, a visual diary of his life, with no specific agenda or the need to prove between fact or fiction, because it is his life lived. And do you think...
It's an honest record of what he saw.
Yes. Do you think there's any place for a viewer living 50 years after to reconcile and have a rapport with his photography?
Yes, absolutely. You can learn a lot from it, I think. Because he hasn't set out to falsify anything. He's just recorded what he saw in an honest, down-to-earth way, with a creative eye.
Even when the buildings are long gone and rebuilt.
Yes.
And finally, John, would you have any last words for aspiring photographers who do want to take this subject seriously and one day to become a photographer?
I think you can learn a lot from the greats of the past. There are many books on photography available, and if you want to learn about technique, you can't do better than look at some of the good books that have been published on photography in the past 20, 30 years, I would say.
Well, thank you very much, John. Thank you for your time and for coming to visit us at the ASHK Society.
My pleasure.
Thank you.